Welcome to Field Notes, the monthly podcast of modern steel construction and AISC. I'm your host, Jeff Weisenberger. Joining me is Mark Holland, Chief Engineer at Paxton Vierling Steel in Omaha. He's a recent AISC Lifetime Achievement Award winner and has a long track record of service to AISC in various capacities. Mark, let's go back to the beginning. What pushed you to be an engineer and how did you get where you are?
Well, actually, I became an engineer because I've always been a bit mechanically inclined.
Okay.
I don't have any moment like Larry Kluth would tell you about the moment he remembers when he decided to become an engineer. I don't have that. It was just, I think I was just born and destined to be this way. I was always a problem solver. I always liked math more than anything else.
Okay.
I think all those things culminated together to turn a person into an engineer. And if you talk to my wife, she'll tell you that I am a true engineer. I just act like one every day of the week, all year long.
Gotcha. So did you start off studying civil engineering or structural engineering in school?
Well, actually, when I went to school initially at OU and I wanted to get architectural engineering. So the first classes I took that first semester were both architecture and engineering. And I quickly realized that to be an architect, you have to have some degree of artistic ability, which I have none.
Okay.
So it quickly dropped the architectural portion of it and decided just to stay in engineering.
Okay. Did you go into the design world before? I mean, I've always known you as working at Paxton Vierling. Were you designing structures before?
When I was at OU, when I finished my undergraduate degree with Tom Murray had just finished building his FEARS lab at OU.
Okay.
And he wanted to staff it with some people that he thought could help him in the lab and help make it grow and be able to put people out there that could actually put the things together. He knew I was a bit mechanically inclined from the classes I had with him. So he invited me to stay there and get a master's degree under him at OU, and that's why I just stayed there and helped Tom with FEARS lab.
Okay. And then was it straight into the fabrication world after that?
Right. So back when I was getting my degree and I was getting finished, the country was in a recession at the time, and I was on a business trip with Tom. We were up at Nucor in Norfolk, Nebraska. I'd done my master's research was for Nucor for standing seam roof systems. And he took me by Paxton Vierling Steel, knowing I was sending out resumes and getting rejected right and left because nobody was hiring engineers that year, and I was fortunate enough to talk to the folks at Paxton Vierling Steel. They knew Tom well, and they liked me. I had done some work for a guy named John Griffiths, who at the time was the vice president of engineering at PBS, and he was also head of the research committee, and they had done some end plate research at FEARS lab.
Okay.
And I had helped set up the test specimens and solve problems while John was watching me do this, and he thought that was pretty impressive. A guy could crawl out from underneath putting a big old bunch of steel together and then walk up to a computer, wash his hands and fix a problem on a computer and then go back to tightening up a bolt. He thought that was a handy skill set for a fabricator to have. So when Tom told him I was looking for a job, he offered me a job at PBS.
Okay. And so where did you start off as basically? Like what was your role? What your title at the beginning?
At PBS?
Yeah.
It was like a sales engineer kind of role. The idea was to promote structural steel locally. This is back in the day. It was when AISC had regional engineers that would travel around the country. And my role was to work with them and like them and help promote structural steel. But one thing that PBS did that some fabricators used to do, I don't know if many of them do it any longer, but when we started there, I worked in the office for just about a month just to get to know people's names and them to know me. And then they put me in the shop to learn how the shop was to work. And I was out there about a year working in the shop. I did all the chores you do as a steel fabricator, from handling material to cutting the material to trying to weld, trying to fit, running the blaster, all the things that you have to do to be a steel fabricator. They worked me through each one of those little areas so I'd get a good feel for what it was like on the shop floor as a steel fabricator. Then after that, I went back to being like a sales engineer. And then I took over the QA portion of what PBS had. They needed to get a QA manual written, so I wrote that for them. I helped them get through the auditing program at the time. That's how I kind of got started there.
Okay. Well, I was going to say you're a go-to person for fabrication engineering now, and I was going to ask how that came to be, but that sounds like that's kind of how it came to be.
Well, so another part of that story was Tom Murray, my major professor. We were sitting around FEARS lab one Friday afternoon after everybody was working, and he said these words to me, and he was right. He said, if you really want to understand structural steel and you want to be a good steel engineer, you got to go work for a fabricator sometime in your career. But he forgot to tell me sooner or later I should probably leave and go do something else.
You skipped that part.
I didn't hear that. I didn't get that part of the
because you said, how long have you been there?
40 years.
40 years. So back to the shop itself, and I understand you are pretty heavily involved in mentoring.
Yes.
And I'm just curious what your philosophy is with that. I mean, maybe some, just a little bit about your experience with that.
Well, so actually, I'm paying the world back. I was mentored by obviously Tom Murray and this gentleman, John Griffiths. So I was very fortunate to have people who took an interest in me, saw potential in me, and was willing to spend time bringing me into the industry and teaching me things that you don't learn in school. You can only learn from someone who wants to mentor to you. And I've benefited from it, obviously. So
Sure.
it's when you have that opportunity, it's only right that you pay it back. So I've had an opportunity to have some young people that have come to PVS to work for me or with me, and I've been able to help them understand the industry better and learn how to interact with the industry and people in the industry. I just think if you have an opportunity if you have experiences and knowledge, it's a responsibility of us as engineers, especially experienced engineers, to mentor as much as we can. We need to bring the next generation along and make them successful for us, because sooner or later we're going to turn it over to them, and we need to make sure that they're ready. So I think mentoring is something all of us that have that kind of experience need to think about doing. It's very rewarding.
Well, that's great to hear, Mark. And so, you're talking about the next generation, and I'm guessing you're mentoring people that are more geared towards your role in the shop. When it comes, though, to the shop floor, say welders, fitters, et cetera, I know almost everybody we talk to these days is saying they're having trouble finding and retaining people, to replace the folks that are retiring. I'm just curious if you all have been experiencing that and how you've been addressing it.
Yeah, so PVS does experience that. What PVS has done as a company is we've started a mentoring program at the local high school.
Okay.
Where we go in and bring kids in. They do welding at school, and then they'll come and they'll work in our shop a couple of days a week, and they get credit for that for school. And if we keep them on and keep them interested in the kind of work that we do, we've actually ended up hiring five or six kids this way and put them in the shop, and they've turned out to be very good welders because we help train them from scratch. So it's kind of a mentoring program to encourage people to weld, not necessarily require them to come to PVS when they graduate.
Sure.
But if they feel a bit of an obligation, then we're lucky to pick them up and keep them. And if you bring them up and get them interested in welding at an early age, they tend to want to hang on to it. Welding's actually an excellent career path. If
Sure.
You're an individual who doesn't want to go to college, welding is a skill set. If you get that, you will always have work. You will always have a job. You're actually physically building something, so it's got to be very rewarding as well.
Oh, sure. No, I can imagine it's very satisfying. I've tried welding once at a steel day event, actually. It didn't go well.
Yeah, it's a skill set.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to work at it to get good at it.
Right. I should give myself a little bit of leeway because it was my only time trying it, but what I noticed is getting it to actually spark and then stay lit. That was the hardest part.
You got to have a depth perception.
Yeah.
It's a hand and eye skill.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, on that note, is the shop at all looking into, most shops are automated to a certain extent. Have you all implemented any robotic welding arms?
Yeah, PVS had a robotic welder for a while.
Okay.
Unfortunately for us, our market is typically industrial.
Okay.
So everything is very different. There's never too many parts that are identical.
Right.
And then what I learned when we had the robot at PVS is that if you do have that kind of automation, you have to plan on how you're going to load that machine up when you're detailing it. You can't do it after it's already been detailed. You've got to think about when you're detailing that work up, you've got to have a way of routing that material to that machine through first step processing to that machine. You've got to think about the kind of connections that the machine can actually do well. It does a lot of connections, but it does some well and more efficiently than others. So you have to think about connection design, routing of the material. And I honestly believe that if we would have had the ability to focus more on that, and probably gotten maybe right now, but in the industrial market, you really don't have that much flexibility often. But if you had, for people that do the commercial work, where you do have a lot of repetition like that, if you have that opportunity to get up front ahead of it, think about it in detailing, think about connection design. I really think those kind of tools are really what are going to help us solve a lot of the labor problem we have in the shop, where about 80% of the beams and columns that we make are usually pretty typical and common.
Right.
It's that last 20% that you really have to have a skilled fitter to do.
Okay.
But if you can take care of that first 20 or 80 or 70% of those parts by using this kind of technology, it frees up that labor to do the harder ones, which I think is really that's what I think as an industry, steel fabricators are going to have to start figuring out how to do a better job of doing. The tools are already, I think we're just having a little bit of trouble learning how to implement them correctly.
Sure. Yeah. That's like that age-old kind of just reality of not having as much repeatable work. But that's an interesting point about trying to find a good way to use that type of technology for, say, this much of it, and then you're still going to need the scaled kind of detail work. It's sort of like painting a wall or painting a room. You can use the broad strokes, but then you got to come in and do the corners and everything, right?
Yeah. I think if you apply it right. The other thing, some of these beam assemblers, they will tack the parts together, but they can also weld it.
Right.
But if you have welders, and one of the positions we have a really hard time finding people to do is fitter.
Sure.
So you make that machine be a fitter, not a fitter and a welder, so you can get it fit up, and then you have a team of welders just doing the final welding would be a fine way, I think, of using those tools.
Okay.
But you got to start from the very beginning. You got to think it through. You got to have somebody own it, and the organization that's there. You got to have somebody who's just dedicated and believes in it and wants to see it work. But put all those things together, I truly believe that technology would be very helpful, very successful.
Excellent. Yeah, no, very good points. Switching gears a little bit. So you've been in Omaha for 40 years now. Where are you from originally?
So I was a son of a military officer. It was during the Cold War, so I was born in Germany.
Okay.
And my father stayed in the military for 20 years, so I was in Germany, Okinawa, Idaho, Texas, Maryland, as my father was going through his military career. He actually owned property in Oklahoma, so when I got out of high school, we had in-state tuition at the University of Oklahoma, so I thought, well, I'll go there and save the family some money by going to in-state tuition.
Sure.
It was actually probably one of the best decisions I ever made, because I ended up getting my master's degree under Tom Murray, which was a huge help for me in the work that I've done.
Yeah. Where did you graduate from high school then?
It was in Maryland, a place called Gambrels, Maryland. It was right dead between Baltimore and Washington.
Gotcha. But because of the property in Oklahoma, you got the tuition.
Right. Because folks in the military in those days, you would have property somewhere, so you had a residence in the U.S.
Sure.
You could travel all over the world.
Sure. Yeah.
So they owned a home in Oklahoma. They owned a home in Lawton, and we had residency there.
Just out of curiosity, where in Germany were you born? Heidelberg. How have you been back since?
Never.
No?
I do have a German birth certificate and nationalization papers.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, Omaha's home now. I mean, it's been home for a long time. So what do you like most about it?
So Omaha is, it's a really comfortable Midwestern town. It's not really large. But it's got the things of a big city without being a big city.
Right.
I live right now in a little place called Carter Lake, Iowa, and if you look at the map, it's a kind of a geographic anomaly because it's literally that Oxbow Lake that there was a big flood cut it off. So I'm literally in Iowa, west of the Missouri River, which gives me the opportunity to say really funny things like I'm the only structural engineer in Iowa west of the Missouri River, because it's a small community and we know most of the folks there, and I'm the only structural engineer that's in that little town. So I can say that, and it's true.
Yep. No, I've actually been out there, and I remember being explained that history of like, why is this part of Iowa
over here,
over kind of in Nebraska?
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Yeah, no, I've been to Omaha a few times, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah. Very hilly, green. Yeah.
Well, Omaha is a great little town. We have the College World Series, which is a wonderful event. We also, Omaha has done a great job of attracting amateur sports events, and we actually also host for the last 3 times the Olympic swim trials in Omaha.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, very good.
And I've talked to people. Jim Malley had a son who was a swimmer, and I asked him about it one time, and he said that in that community of elite swimmers like Jim's boys were, they said that Omaha does have that reputation of being really, really good for amateur sporting events. That's why people like the College World Series is there. That's why the Olympic swim trials come there. So.
And if you want to go watch football, you can drive, an hour or so?
Yeah, another funny thing about that story is Nebraska's not a very populated state.
No.
You have Omaha, which is the largest city in the state, and you have Lincoln, which is the next largest city in the state, and then on game day, the stadium is the 3rd largest population center in the state.
Yep, I've heard that. Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Yeah. I went to a Big Ten school, and I've been to a lot of Big Ten stadiums, but I haven't yet been to Memorial Stadium, so that's
they keep growing. They keep adding on to it.
I've noticed that, yeah. And it doesn't matter how good they are, they always seem to sell it out.
Well, they will always sell out. Yeah. Husker fans, although they demand perfection, they keep coming back even when they don't get it.
That's a very good way of putting it. So, and just one more question. is travel-wise, I like to ask this of people because I like travel, and I think most people do. If you could go anywhere in the world that you haven't been yet, what's towards the top of the list?
I've always wanted to go to New Zealand.
Okay, and why?
It just seems like you see. Well, like The Hobbit. I think The Hobbit was filmed there.
Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings. Just beautiful scenery, and it has everything from high mountains with snow to deep gorges with water, jet boats driving up and down them. That then also has beautiful beaches. And I hear that it's just a place where the people are friendly and they welcome you. I just always thought New Zealand would be that one place that we'd like to go for.
Well, I'm sure you'll get there someday.
I hope so.
Yeah. That wraps up another edition of Modern Steel Construction's Field Notes podcast, and I'm your host, Jeff Weisenberger. Thanks for listening, everyone.